So, woke may be on the decline, or maybe it's going to be on the ascendancy once certain political figures change their position, so to speak. Who knows? This tendency towards postmodernism, relativism, cultural relativism, whatever you want to call it, moral relativism, it seems to ebb and flow over the years. Now, the interesting thing with woke and the response to woke that I've found recently on a couple of trips to the United States is that one response comes in the form of we should return to traditional religions. We should return to traditional religions because they have a firm foundation for morality. They understand the black and white difference between truth and falsity, good and evil. And if you reject traditional religion, you're rejecting that. You're rejecting the idea that there is an objective standard for morality, or there's an objective standard for truth. And so the only answer in response to woke is to return to traditional religions. Now, I want to talk a little bit about this today. Is in fact the only response to postmodernism of whatever kind, whether it's woke or the older forms of it, or indeed the response to, let's say, communism and socialism and that kind of thing, is a return to traditional religions. Is there a better way? It's been interesting for me recently to be in a number of conversations where my interlocutor has insinuated that there are basically two kinds of people. These two kinds of people are those who accept the importance, indeed the centrality, of religion to maintaining civilization, and those who reject that idea. And unless you are a believer of some kind, whether in the supernatural or at least in the cultural importance of traditional religious teachings, then in rejecting that, in rejecting the idea of religion, you are some sort of revolutionary, an atheist who thinks that the undermining of Western civilization is the only way we can go about making progress. Now, I happen to think that this binary between you either accept religion as an inherent good for maintaining civilization, or you reject it on the basis that it's just a white colonial project or something like that. I think both of these positions contain within them deep misconceptions. Being a committed believer in some kind of theism, or indeed any kind of traditional religion, will commit you to a kind of supernaturalism. This idea that there are real miracles in the world, that God in fact created all life on earth and is somehow maintaining all of the biological processes that are going on and is in charge of the natural forces, whatever it happens to be. That kind of supernaturalism, I don't think there is any rational basis for endorsing that. We can just say there are certain questions we do not have the answers to. Why is the universe here? How did life exactly begin? We just don't know. What is consciousness? And so on and so forth. I am comfortable in saying I don't know. We should admit when there are certain questions that we do not have answers to. Now, that's on the one hand. We might want to reject religion for that reason, that it contains supernatural nonsense. Now, on the other hand, let's say you're an atheist who doesn't believe in the supernatural stuff, but you think for some reason that religion serves an important purpose in keeping society stable, or in some way ensuring that traditions throughout society are kept the same so that people don't fall into sin, mass murder and raping and theft and all the sort of bad stuff that we don't want to have. This is the kind of position that I get from great heroes of mine, by the way. I get the sense that people like Douglas Murray, for example, and to an even stronger extent, Jordan Peterson, they think that because there is wisdom in the traditions, that the traditions therefore should not be criticized strongly from every single angle for fear that we will be left with no moral foundation. And I think this is wrong. And I think people who have watched my stuff over the years will know why this is wrong, because I don't think there needs to be a foundation. There doesn't need to be a foundation in mathematics. I know that's controversial. There doesn't need to be a foundation in science. There doesn't need to be a foundation in philosophy. There doesn't need to be a moral foundation. Instead, what we should want to do to make progress is to solve problems. And the next scientific problem that comes along, we should want to solve that without regard to what the supposed foundations are, because the foundations themselves might be the problem that we want to solve. There's some problem at the foundations of physics, let's say, and indeed there always are. This is why people work on the foundations of physics, to try and move forward, to make progress, even in the deepest understanding we have of physical reality, which is in the foundations of physics, or in the theoretical foundations of physics, let's say. Now, mathematics is similar. Of course, there do exist these things called axioms, which you might regard as foundations, but different mathematical systems have different axiomatic systems which govern them. And you can't have a universal axiomatic system for all of mathematics for the reasons that Gödel outlined. If you try and do that, you will end up finding that your axioms, no matter how long a list you want to enumerate of axioms, will always be incomplete. There will always be true things that are not computable or not provable from within that system. So you can always expand the system, and therefore even mathematics itself doesn't have a firm foundation. It's a creative exercise. Every single domain of human inquiry contains this important element, that it is a creative exercise. It's a place where we want to solve problems. Also, what we want is to be able to make progress. We want to be able to make a form of social progress without me being able to define that. Or we might want to be able to simply improve the circumstance of individuals within that particular society, and this will constitute civilizational progress of some sort. All kinds of progress will in some way come to bear upon civilizational progress. If we make progress in chemistry, we're going to make civilizational progress in mathematics and in morality and so on and so forth. We don't need to define what progress is, by the way. We just know it when we see it. But the key thing that I want to say here and now is you do not need to fall into one of these two camps. You do not need to fall into the camp of, I am going to be a committed religious person and indeed fall back into practicing the traditional religion of my grandparents or whatever, because the alternative that I see around me is people who have fallen into sin, people who have fallen into personal disarray, in rejecting all of our cultural norms and that kind of thing. And that is leading to some sort of suffering, increased suffering in society, individually and in broader groups as well. People rejecting our, let's say, conservative traditional ideals. And the only solution to this is to return to the religions of the past. But the misconception that I was encountering again and again in speaking to people who were defending this idea that we should return to old religious ideas, even if they were ostensibly in some way rejecting the supernatural, even if they weren't really on board with the divinity of Jesus, or his miraculous birth, or any of the miracles that happen to be there in the Bible. Even if they weren't on board with that, they still thought that the best prescription was for society as a whole to return to religion. Now, I agree on the one hand that simply turning to atheism and rejecting all of religion does not allow you to replace the whole that you have in terms of morality and significance in the universe and that kind of thing. Atheism is not going to give you that. And so many people will be left sort of flailing without an anchor of a kind. They will feel that sense of either I'm drifting aimlessly and there's no purpose to life because, hey, God doesn't exist and I'm not aiming for heaven because heaven doesn't exist. They'll be left in that way and they will see no way out, and they realise that the science isn't going to give them the answers and atheism hasn't given them the answers. And so they go one of two ways. They fall into a kind of postmodernist hell, and they think that political systems like Marxism, say, would be an answer. And again, as I say, the only response to that offered by some people is, no, you must remain in a traditional religion of some kind. The truth of the matter is that there is important wisdom or knowledge within some religious traditions, but it is quite right to say that we are the ones who come to understand what that is and to reject the nonsense that is there. And there is a lot of nonsense in all traditional religions. And so we all know which parts to reject and which parts to think are wise. Now, what is the more rational approach to any of this. The more rational approach to any of this is simply to approach religion as we approach any other claim about reality. To criticise it, to accept the conjectures that we do not have good criticisms of, and otherwise reject the supernatural stuff, reject the stuff that is just out and out wrong, like, for example, killing some group of people because they do not belong to your particular religious tradition, or to treat the women in your society more poorly because it's written there in the Holy Book. We know to reject all that. But we also know what parts to accept as containing some kind of wisdom, or perhaps to regard as containing a mystery of some kind, and that's fine too. It's fine to think that perhaps, sometimes, very rarely, people in the past had a good idea, which we've forgotten now. That can be the case. I think it's rare, but it can be the case. And so therefore, discarding all of the wisdom in the holy books is a bad idea, because some of it will be wisdom, some of it will be knowledge, some of it will contain inexplicit prescriptions for how to run a society better than absent those ideas. And so, for example, the nuclear family is something that people talk about as being a good idea, a kind of unit of society. And perhaps that's true. It seems as if anyone that deviates from that and you go towards communism, where you replace parents with the government, is a bad idea. My point here now is that there does exist wisdom, more importantly, knowledge, or indeed a certain kind of knowledge about how to keep society stable, there in religious traditions. I think we've improved on a vast amount of what is there, and we shouldn't be afraid of saying so. And we shouldn't be afraid of saying that both rejecting all of religion and endorsing it as an important belief system around which to organise your life, that both of these can contain flaws. And in fact, what you should be doing is seeking to be a person who is trying to solve their problems. And if religious ideas help you to solve your problem, okay, that's very well, but there may be a better way of coming to understand the so-called wisdom that is in the books, and indeed there is wisdom there, from a rational perspective. Not needing to say that the reason why this book is wise is because it is inspired by the Holy Spirit or some other supernatural entity. You can instead say, okay, people in the past understood some stuff. We can understand that stuff too, and indeed we can improve upon it. That at no point should we say that any of the ideas in these books are held off the table, immune from criticism, that they are dogmas that we need to adhere to without the capacity to ever improve or criticise. We need to be able to apply the critical method to everything. And in applying the critical method to everything, what we will find is that some of what the traditional religions say will stand up to the criticism and survive the criticism, and indeed in doing so, prove their worth as actual explanations about the world. Now, all of the Holy Book cannot possibly stand up to that, no matter what the religious tradition is that you're coming from. Much of it will be criticised and be unable to survive that criticism because we have found something better. And we should expect this to continue to happen. That in the long run, because all knowledge claims contain falsehood to some extent, that we are surrounded by misconception, and only misconception, we do not have the truth there. And anyone who claims they have the truth is leading you down a road of tyranny. The doctrine that the truth is manifest is the root of all tyranny, as Popper says. So do not agree with the people who say that they have the truth. But listen to the people who say, this seems to be a good explanation, this seems to be a good idea. Perhaps there is something worth salvaging here, that it's not all bad, and that religions aren't all bad, nor are they all good. That just like science, we should expect them to contain errors, misconceptions about the world, and that they can be improved upon. But being dogmatically committed to any particular set of ideas always and everywhere leads to ruin. It's a bad idea. Don't think that the only way to ensure the survival of civilization, Western civilization, the Enlightenment, is to adhere to dogma. But at the same time, don't think that by rejecting a book because it contains some errors, that therefore you should reject all of the claims in that book, and all of the followers of people who think that that book contains good ideas is also a prescription for improving reality. It's not. We need to start from a position, as we do in science or mathematics or philosophy or anywhere else for that matter, that we do know something, and religions know something as well. And that stuff that we do know, we need to protect while trying to improve it, but also defending some of the important ideas that we have come to figure out allow for us to continue to create more and more better ideas. And that includes the means of error correction. That includes free speech. That includes free trade. That includes democracy. All of those things. And many of those things we should want to protect or defend with our very lives. It can be that important as well. Even though we can admit none of these things are the ultimate final truth. Because even for an idea for which you would die, or you would defend to the death with your life, they might still be false, but that doesn't mean they're not worth defending, because falsehoods can contain truth. They can contain important, civilizationally important truth. It's just that in the final analysis, you might be able to figure out a way of expressing that, or a new idea that contains within it, as a limiting principle, the idea you're defending with your life. But if you understand it more deeply, you'll realise that in fact the idea that you are strictly defending is in fact false, because you can always improve upon it. You can always find error within it, and when you find error within it, you correct the error and you get to a better, deeper understanding of whatever that thing happens to be. Okay, so this has been my experience with speaking to people who, even though they're atheists, have been telling me that they are very committed to protecting traditional religions, because traditional religions contain dogma, mind you, that is important for us to defend. Okay, subtle mind shift with thinking about it not as dogma, but as good explanations, and a subtle mind shift with thinking about the way in which you might want to not seek the ultimate final truth, but instead come to identify and correct errors, and that way make progress, even using religious wisdom and the text that religious people tend to point to when it comes to claims about how to ensure civilizational stability. Until next time, bye-bye.